And Kevin and Monty, if y'all want to come up to the front too, we've got a few introductions that we would like to take place tonight. And I'm the first to go up. My name is Brian Toney. I'm an organizer with the Dallas Housing Coalition. Nice to meet you all. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Hearing from Chuck, the Dallas Housing Coalition's been busy lately. Is this anyone's first event or Dallas Housing Coalition kind of intro? Awesome. That's great to see. We're a fairly new nonprofit. We launched in June of 2023. Our mission is to advocate for the creation and preservation of attainable housing in the city of Dallas for all. We launched initially around a bond campaign for affordable housing and homelessness solutions. We were successful in getting $82 million dedicated to those two causes, the first time in the city of Dallas's history related to bond funding. So one clap, which props to GH&I. And that funding is now being made available in this fiscal year budget. So all your advocacy, all of our showing up in light blue shirts at City Hall, calls and emails to City Council did in fact make a difference. And as soon as essentially props GH and I passed in May, we pulled our membership again and we asked them what else do we want to focus on. And that next topic was Forward Dallas. And Forward Dallas just passed City Council last week with an 11-4 vote. None of that would have been possible without our members. We've grown from an organization of 63 members to now 250 organizations. And you can join us at DallasHousingCoalition.com and follow us on all our social media channels. We are live streaming tonight's event on Instagram. We'll also download it and reshare it on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. So you can follow us on any one of those channels and share our work with your network, with your neighbors. Because this growing movement and momentum has to be sustained in Dallas, as we're going to have more minute and even larger scale reforms that Dallas might need to make housing more affordable. And that's what we're here to learn more about today. So that's my piece. I'm now honored to introduce our board chair and CEO of Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity, Ashley Brundage, to say a few words about Habitat and their work, and then introduce our next speaker.
Habitat for Humanity is on a mission to build affordable, decent housing for everyone, which is why we were proud to be helpful in the launch of the Dallas Housing Coalition and still a strong partner in all the work that they're doing to advocate for affordable housing, to advocate for Forward Dallas. We're always proud to help to support that work because that makes our work easier, right? And it helps fund a lot of what we're trying to do, which is important. I am so glad to see so many faces here tonight, new faces. So hopefully we are spreading the word further. I am excited to be able to introduce to you one of our sponsors from Options Real Estate Investors. I swear I'm going to get it right without looking at my notes, except for that I lost my notes. I totally blanked on your name, I'm sorry. That's right, Monty Anderson, y'all. It was on the wrong page. So Monty is here as a supporter and a longtime friend of Chuck's, it sounds like, which is very cool. He has, this is his creation that we are in today, which is a really interesting building. Plus, he does a lot of experimenting on how to help approach the affordable housing crisis in an incremental way, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. So I'm going to hand it over to Monty. Sorry.
I am Monty Anderson. I've spent my whole life doing incremental development in southern Dallas County where I grew up. And so where I'll die one day just doing real estate deals. So glad you're here tonight. Glad you're here to look at Tyler Station. And when you get through, we have about 70 different tenants in this building, so it's quite a village here. And how many of you have been here before? How many of you hadn't been here? So that's great. So you should walk around, and after you get through, you need to go down to Oak Cliff Brewery and drink a lot of beer. You can get some free beer here, but you got to go when this is over. Go down there. Anyway, you're in Wax Space today, which is a co-working space. The interesting thing about Wax Space, and here's Grant Flambara over here. Grant says, Grant, this This is his operation here. He runs Wax Space, and he's also my partner in the real estate here at Tyler Station. And Wax Space, the interesting thing about it in co-working is that their offices are here, and all the people that are here at Wax Space, they're part of their family here. And so that's what makes this kind of co-working really work today. So I was thinking about Chuck from years ago. This is over 10 years ago, Chuck, I think. We were at the Texas Theater listening to this guy, this engineer from Minnesota, come and tell us about this stuff. And we didn't have a place to meet at the Texas Theater, so we met in a stairwell. Chuck stood up at the top of the stairwell. There was about 12 people, or 10 or 12 people. And it's come a long way since then. And this guy's become one of the fastest growing movements of this kind in the world probably today. They're really moving fast. And so we're glad to have him here today telling us about what he's got to do. And with that, I got to introduce the next speaker, and I do know his name. Kevin Shepard. You know, I'm the guy on the ground doing the work, but without, the whole ecosystem, without city staffs and city councils and engineers and architects, and especially without people like Verdunity, their company, who is working around the country, changing zoning, changing the way we do infrastructure, preparing the places where small incremental developers can work. We can never do what we do as small developers. And so I welcome my friend Kevin Shepard today.
It's good to be here tonight, and I get the honor of introducing our speaker. Chuck and I first met all the way back in 2010. I was working at HDR at the time, and I was in a bit of a hybrid role. So part of my days were working with the North Texas Municipal Engineering Program. And then I was transitioning into a role that was National Director of our firm's Community Planning and Urban Design Practice. And so some days I was working on civil engineering design of paving, drainage, water, sewer with cities all over North Texas, primarily in a suburban, fast growth, auto-centric growth, very aggressive growth if you think back to the 2012 timeframe. And then the other part, I was traveling around the country working on comp plans, sustainability plans, all kinds of plans. And what I started to see is no matter where I went, big city, small city, rural, urban, suburban, very few cities had the money that they needed to pay for their infrastructure. And so I started to ask, why are we such a prosperous country, but our cities are really struggling to pay the bills? And so I went home one night, probably 10:30, 11 o'clock. I'm in my study. I'm Googling around, trying to find somebody that can help me answer this question. And I stumble on this blog from this guy, Chuck Marohn. And I don't remember if it was a Strongtown's blog at the time or if it was just Chuck blogging. The design of the site was awful, by the way. But the content was amazing. And I read, and I read, and I read. And it was 6 hours later, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm I got to reach out to this guy. He's an engineer like me. He's doing planning stuff like me. And he is talking my language. So I reached out, we talked. That conversation and several after that were what inspired me to ultimately pushed me over the edge to leave my former job, start Verdunity back in April of 2011. Since that time, we've grown into a planning and engineering consultancy. We work all over the country helping communities implement Strongtown's principles, put Strongtown's principles into practice. That can be comp plans, that can be land use fiscal analysis to explain the fiscal impacts of development patterns. We also do engineering for guys like Monty, the incremental developers that are doing the incremental stuff on the ground to change our communities. So that's been our story. What's cool about Chuck and Strongtowns, though, is I remember the first week of the national gathering in Minnesota. 40 of us are up there, and we're we think this can change the world, right? That movement today is, I have no idea how many members it is, but it has been so cool to see how the movement has grown. To see how they're impacting communities. And what I love most, you're going to see Chuck has a gift of making very complicated things easy to understand. But what I love about Strongtowns is it's not a right organization, it's not a left organization, it's a movement of people that just want to make their communities better. And this guy's at the center of it, so it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, and I think you're one of Planet Edison's top 100 most influential urbanists, Chuck Marohn.
It's very nice to be here. I have been invited to speak in Dallas. Well, this is probably my like 7th or 8th time. Every time Kevin or Monty, or there's a couple other people that have been involved in making that happen. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to come out. I do feel like, before I get started, that there is a couple of nuanced things to say about these introductions. First of all, I think Kevin kind of downplayed this move from, he said, I was at HDR, then I went and started Verdunity. That is a scary leap in the dark. I'm leaving a stable job, I have a family, I'm on a track to be like an owner here of a major firm. All I gotta do is do soulless work. Instead, I'm gonna go out on my own and do something where there's no business model, where there's no path. And it's been astounding to watch him and his firm figure out how to do this. There is, in the engineering profession, there's very lucrative models for building really horrible stuff. And there really is no business model for doing the fine-grained, relationship level, block level type of stuff. And they've been working to figure it out, and it's been really grateful to have Kevin as a friend and be able to be a part of that shit. Monty introduced Kevin, and Monty is a beautiful, amazing person. I think that oftentimes we don't appreciate the assets we have right in our community. But if we look nationwide, Monty Anderson is known as the person who you go to when you're trying to figure out how to revitalize a tough spot. How do we build this with the tools that we have, with the money that we have, with the people that we have, without displacing people, without dislocating people, without changing the nature and the essence? How do we take a place and make it better? And Monty, I have watched him not only do this in kind of a crazy way in his place. Again, no business model for doing this, right? I mean, this is a person who, if he had gone a traditional route, probably could have made a lot more money, but not slept as well at night. A person who has poured a lot of love into what he's done here in your community, but has also taken that love and that passion and brought it out and used his time to teach others. And I think that's been the most inspiring thing. As I go around the country and talk to people about their places, Monty's name comes up over and over and over again as someone who takes the phone call randomly and spends half an hour chatting with someone for no benefit of his own, just to spread the knowledge that he has that he's accumulated. So, an absolute community treasure. I feel like, yeah, please. And that is a testament to Monty's brilliance and perseverance. I feel like there's a couple other people, just as long as we're here, that I want to acknowledge before we get too much further. I've got a friend here, Laura Clemens, who does heartfelt work, again, in disaster recovery. I've got another really, really good friend, Chad Janisek, sitting right here, who works with cities doing some of the best finance stuff in the country. He's been an advisor to strong towns in a way in certain projects, and has helped us understand how cities work. Would you stand up for a second so people can see? And then I don't think he's here tonight. I didn't see him, and I didn't talk to him. I don't know if he's going to be here. But Patrick Kennedy, Walkable DFW, online. If you don't know Patrick, you should be following him and plugged in with him. Patrick personally is just kind of an inspiration to me. Way back in the early days of writing Strong Towns, it was a lonely wilderness that I was talking into. There were not very many people out there who, in a sense, spoke back, and Patrick Kennedy was one of them. And I really, really have been inspired over and over again by not only his kind of kindness and generosity on a human level, but also just the idea of what one crazy, fanatical person who's willing to drill down on an idea can accomplish. And he's a special, special person in your community, and I just wanted to acknowledge him before we get too far. So, yay for Patrick. When we ask people, is there a housing crisis? The answer that we get across the board is yes. But when we follow up that question with, all right, what needs to happen to housing prices in order to alleviate this crisis situation? Half the people say they need to go up, and half the people say they need to go down. You may be in one of the categories that think it's obvious that housing prices need to go up. You may be in one of the categories of people who think that housing prices obviously need to go down, right? The amazing thing about these categories of people is that they don't really interlope very much. There's no overlap between the two of them. We are having, in a sense, two different conversations about housing in this country. One of the conversations is about housing as shelter. And in that conversation, housing is unaffordable, it's too expensive, it's not attainable for people. Even people who can get in housing have to stretch themselves too far. And so in order to alleviate those problems, housing prices need to come down, and come down in some ways dramatically. The other conversation is about housing as a financial product. The idea that housing and its derivative products, mortgage-backed securities and other such products, sit not only at the heart of our financial system, but are really the vehicle in which we create and build wealth broadly throughout our economy. In one of these conversations, housing prices must fall. In the other conversation, housing prices cannot be allowed to fall. They cannot be allowed to fall without causing enormous damage to our economy. This is the housing trap. This is where we find ourselves today as Americans. In a situation where we can obviously look around and see housing is not affordable. And this is having huge impacts on individuals, on families, on family formation, on our culture, on our communities. We can also stand back and recognize, though, the precarious situation of housing as an investment vehicle. Housing is literally the financial security for our banking system. If housing goes down, banks fail. If interest rates go up, banks fail because of housing. When Henry Paulson went to Capitol Hill in 2008, the Treasury Secretary, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, went to Capitol Hill and knelt down in front of Nancy Pelosi and said, if you don't give the banks $1 trillion in the next 24 hours, there will be no food on the shelves in 2 days, there will be no money in the ATMs in 2 days, and there will be widespread unemployment. He was actually not joking. He was not exaggerating. This is how central housing is to our conversation. This is the trap we are in. And when I talk to people about this, when I talk to mayors and city council members, when I talk to city staff members, when I talk to other local leaders in the community about this problem, the overwhelming feeling that is expressed to me is one of helplessness. How do we deal with this problem? The problem seems so huge, it seems so massive, it seems so overwhelming. The things that we're doing seem so ineffective in comparison. How do we, even a city the size of Dallas, deal with this massive, massive problem? This feeling of helplessness is pernicious, and this feeling of helplessness is what we need to get rid of, because there are so many things we can do when we break out of the housing trap. That's what I hope at the end of the night tonight, that nobody in this room goes out feeling helpless. In order to understand where we are, I want to talk a little bit about the way housing is financed. If we go back before the Great Depression, what we see is that if you were going to buy a house, you were going to make that purchase, and you were going to get a mortgage, you were going to do that through a local bank. Local banks are extremely risk averse, particularly, in the pre-Great Depression era. Local banks were literally taking your money and lending it to someone else. And so they were going to have to not only be accountable to all their neighbors, all the people in the community, but if people locally lost faith in the bank, they were going to pull their money out and the bank was going to fail. This was an extremely, extremely conservative, and I don't mean that in a political sense, I mean that in like a human, like extremely risk-averse kind of undertaking. And so, and this really reflects the way housing has been financed throughout all of time, really until recently. If you were going to get a home loan, you were going to, first of all, have to have 50% down payment. You were going to have 50% equity in the home to begin with. The bank would lend you the other 50%, but they would do it on an interest-only loan that was financed over a very short period of time. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, a short window. And at the end of that window, the balloon payment would come due. And ostensibly, the bank would then be in a position to renegotiate with you a new balloon payment or a new 3 to 5 year loan. This provided the bank with the ability to get out of bad investments. If there was a change in inflation or change in interest rates and the bank had to adjust their portfolio, they were not stuck paying bad rates for a long period of time or collecting little interest. They were able to adjust with the market. This provided protection for the local bank and provided a way for people to access reasonable amounts of capital from their neighbors. This changed in the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, what happened to home prices? Home prices went down, right? We had 25% unemployment. We had large economic dislocation. People didn't have a lot of money, right? And so housing prices in aggregate went down. When people went in then to refinance their house, when their 3-year, 4-year, 5-year balloon came due, and they had to come in and refinance, get a new loan, what the bank would do is say, well, your house is worth less now today, and so we are going to lend you less than what we lent you last time. We need a security blanket. We need you to have skin in the game. We need a lot of equity because we are literally like risking everybody else's loan. And oh, by the way, it's the middle of the Great Depression, so we can't really compromise on that. We're scared too. This creates a gap between what you owe and what the bank will lend you. And in order for you to complete this transaction, the bank needs you to come up with a bunch of cash to close that gap in the middle of the Great Depression. A lot of people couldn't do this. What happens when you couldn't do this? What would the bank do when you couldn't come up with that cash? The bank would foreclose on your house. And you would be kicked out, and the bank would then turn around and sell your house at a foreclosure auction. What happens when a bunch of houses get sold at a foreclosure auction? What happens to housing prices? They drop further. And then the next person who comes in to refinance their house has an even bigger gap. They get thrown into foreclosure, more houses, prices go down. Economists call this a deflationary spiral. And what you had was a situation where, through no fault of anyone who lent, people were being kicked out of their homes, they were being forced out of their homes, banks were being forced into foreclosure, to foreclose on places, and housing prices was continuing to fall. At the beginning of President Roosevelt administration, beginning of the New Deal, one of the early things that was done was meant to stop this deflationary spiral. The first thing that they did was they went to local banks and they said, hey, if you're going to foreclose on someone, don't do it. Sell the loan to us. The federal government will buy that loan from you. Don't kick people out. Don't sell that loan. Don't foreclose. We will buy that loan from you. So right away, the federal government makes local banks whole. The federal government then would turn around to the property owner and say, hey, if you would like, you can stay in your home. We will refinance that for you over 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, eventually longer periods of time. We'll make this loan not just an interest-only loan, but we'll make it a principal and interest loan. So at the end of this period, you'll actually own the house. Eventually, the federal government went to local banks and said, hey, we need to get you lending again. You need to do more home mortgages. It's really hard to do at 50% down payment. So why don't you make the down payment 40%? Why don't you make it 30%? Why Why don't you make it 25%? Or how about 20%? And we know that creates more risk for you at the local level. So we, the federal government, will write you an insurance policy and insure you against that loss. If there is a foreclosure, you're still going to have your 50% secured. We'll take care of that part. They created an organization or an entity called Fannie Mae. And the idea of Fannie Mae was that Fannie Mae would buy qualifying mortgages from local banks. We talk a lot today, there's a growing awareness of the concept of redlining. Redlining was downstream from Fannie Mae. And the idea that if you were in a green or a blue area and the people who were making the loan could check certain boxes, Fannie Mae would buy your loan, essentially no questions asked. If you were in a red area or a yellow area, it was questionable on whether the federal government would buy your loan, and so those loans were generally not originated locally. This was all about getting banks lending again, with the federal government supporting and propping up the system of lending. I'm going to pause here and make a statement that we make in the book, and I think it's a fair statement, and I think it's an important one to say at this point. I think that in the midst of the Great Depression, that these interventions were a moral thing to do. And I don't use that word moral lightly. You had people who, through no fault of their own, were getting kicked out of their homes, were being dislocated. They had played by all the rules. They didn't have a big, bubble in the 1920s. They didn't have a roaring 20s experience. They didn't engineer a stock market crash. They were going to their jobs, they were saving money, they were living prudently, and they got caught up in this kind of big system that ground them down and were kicking them out of their house. I think that stepping in and stopping that deflationary spiral and letting people stay in their homes was a very, very moral thing to do. As we got to the end of World War II, there was fear among economists that when the war ended, we were going to go right back into the depths of the Great Depression. This is a quote from Paul Samuelson, one of the senior economists advising FDR. He wrote famously in this memo, if the war ends today, there's going to be ushered in this period of massive dislocation and unemployment, greater than anybody's ever seen. Essentially, when we demobilize these millions of troops and bring them home, when we shut down all the industries that were building the ships and the tanks and the munitions, when the war is over, we're just going to go right back to the depths of the Great Depression. There's nothing different about the economy today than there was a decade ago. That was the thinking at the time. Is that ultimately what happened? No, right? What happened is we kicked off like the greatest 2 decades, or at least the 2 decades that we nostalgize the most in modern American history. This post-war boom. What we did in a nutshell is we took all of this capacity that we had dedicated to fighting a global war, and we repurposed it into building a new version of America. We took all of that industrial might, we took all of that capital, we took all of the kind of cultural capital that we had created, and we turned it into making our cities grow very, very quickly as a way to create jobs, economic development, growth. We funded highways, we funded sewer systems, we funded water systems. We paid for commercial developments. We did this from the top down to try to create jobs and growth in our economy. And we took the tools that we had used to stop a deflationary spiral, and we repurposed them in order to, and I'm going to use the word that they were using at the time that we still use today, in order to expand housing and make it more attainable for more people. We took those tools and we realized the tools that were really helpful in stopping the economy from going down would be even more useful to make the economy go up. We made it easier for more people to borrow more money and ultimately pay more for housing. We did things like lower down payments even further. 30% is good. How about 20%? How about 10%? How about 5%? How about 0%? We extended payments out over time. 15 years is great. How about 20 years? How about 30 years? We created other institutions. We had Fannie Mae. We created Freddie Mac. We created, ultimately, another organization called Ginnie Mae. These were designed to, in a sense, bail out local banks when they wanted to not hold those long-term risky loans. And in doing this, we kickstarted a booming economy that we still nostalgize today, right? I think I said this last time I was here, and I'll say it again. I realize we are in an election season, and election seasons are polarizing. So what I'm going to say now, I don't mean in a partisan way. If you know you have partisan inclinations, just suppress them for the next 30 seconds. I found it astounding back in our 2016 presidential election. The narratives that were being put forth by our two major party candidates. We had two major party candidates that were both, at that point in time in their life, were in their early 70s. And they were talking about, they were painting a picture for us of an America that fit their vision of what the best time in their life had been. For one candidate, it was Aussie inherit families and blue-collar jobs. For the other candidate, it was the idea of a federal government that could be very generous, very expansive, do like great important things. Both candidates were talking about the same moment in time, the couple of decades after World War II, where we turned that machine of war into a machine of growth. And we made our cities grow, 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 grow. This was wildly successful, particularly when it came to housing. What I'm showing you here now is something called the Case-Shiller Index. This is an index of housing prices over time. I started it in 1946 at the end of World War II, and it goes to the beginning of 2008. You can see here how home prices have shifted and adjusted over time. And I want to take you on just a little trip with this chart. If you start in 1946, you see there's some initial volatility at the end of World War II, and then we have this long period of housing price decline. You can think of housing post-World War II as being an assembly line, right? We talk about cookie-cutter subdivisions. That's literally what we did, is we created an assembly line to build all the complex things that went into making it place. So we simplified down all that complexity into a few steps. What's your zoning code? How are you going to finance this? What kind of home is it? Bam, 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 bam. And what you saw is that in that initial expansion, as time went on, we became better at doing it. And because we became better at doing it, like all things, like, you know, your cell phone, your big screen TV, all of that, it became a commodity that we could drive down the price. By the way, I gave a talk last week to a bunch of finance people, and they tried to make the argument to me that that's basically how the only way we can solve today's housing price is to drive down the unit cost, just like we do with cell phones and big screen TVs. If you look at this chart, at the end of the 1960s, we experienced a bout of inflation. Inflation that made housing prices go up. I want you to ponder for a second what happens to local banks when you have a bout of inflation. And what happens to, you know, regional and big banks too, but I want you to particularly focus on local banks. If you have a bank that is collecting deposits from people and they are paying, let's say, 5% interest. I know that's crazy for young people here. The banks used to actually pay interest. It was substantial. So a bank was paying 5% interest. What they would do then is they would lend that money out at, let's say, 7%. And that difference would be the spread, and that would be the profit the bank would make, right? That makes sense? We're all on the same page. happens though if you have a bout of inflation? What happens if inflation goes to 8%? Well, now your depositors are going to demand at least 8% on their money to deposit it in your bank. What if you don't pay that rate of interest? What will happen? They will pull their money out and put it in a different bank that does. And then your bank will fail. What happens if you pay 8% interest? Well, you're only collecting 7% interest on the loan you made. Now you're paying out 8% interest. Every month you are slowly bleeding to death. You are slowly losing your reserves and your capital. And so what happens is rising interest rates destroys the balance sheets of local banks. This is why local banks before the Great Depression would only write 3- and 5-year loans. Because if I'm going to bleed to death, there's going to be an end to the bleeding. There will be a point in time where my portfolio will roll over and I can reset it at higher interest rates. Do you follow me? This is a hedging of risk. But now we told local banks, hey, make these long-term loans. Make these 30-year loans. Hold them on your books. And if they go bad, what do? As long as it's a qualifying mortgage, the federal government will buy it for you. The federal government will, in a sense, take the loss when things go bad. And so in the early 1960s, what we had was a run-up of inflation. Housing prices went up. There was a rise in interest rates. There was an effort this is when Freddie Mac was created and Ginnie Mae was created, to increase liquidity to bail out local banks. Interest rates went up and housing prices went back down. We repeated that again in the late 1970s. Again, about a higher inflation. Prices went up a lot higher. There was a raising of interest rates. There were a lot of banks that failed and a lot of banks that should have failed, but the FDIC did not drive them out of business. Instead, what we did is we had an active policy to grow our way out of our insolvencies. That resulted in the S&L crisis, where literally bad money drove out good money. We were trying to grow. Regulators, in a sense, turned a blind eye to nefarious practices in order to achieve that growth. When the S&L bubble broke, we started on a path that economists at the time called decentralization, what ultimately ended up to be the subprime housing crisis. The idea that the way we would create growth in the economy was to juice the housing markets by having very low interest rates for a long time and do securitization on a mass scale. We would take mortgages that were originated at a local bank, sell them to bundlers who would buy up many of them, bundle them into one package, cut that package up into little slices they called securities, like a stock, and they would sell that to investors, to pension funds, and to banks. We actually made a federal law in the 1980s during one of these panics that said if you own AA or higher rated mortgage-backed securities, as a local bank, you can use that as the highest form of collateral, as high as a treasury security would be. And so local banks literally could not get enough of these financial instruments. They were in super high demand, which is how you, by the way, get banks making loans to people who have no income and making loans to people who have no chance of paying the loan back. Because these were all being bundled up and sold off to people who ultimately did not bear the financial risk. I go through this story because I want you to recognize what these are. Single-family home is a fantastic financial product. It is also shelter for millions of Americans, but its primary purpose in today's economy is as a financial product. And it is a great financial product because it can be commingled, bundled with all kinds of other similar products in our economy. We can bundle together houses from Texas with houses from Minnesota, with houses from California and New York and Florida and Vermont and name your place. And we create a diversified portfolio of essentially the pledged income of people all over the United States paying their monthly mortgage payment. That is a fantastic financial product. The 5/1, or the apartment complex, it doesn't have to be a 5/1, but like the big building, right? With 60 units, 80 units, 200 units. This is also, again, a tremendously successful financial product. We can build these in kind of a standardized way. We can price them for luxury. We can price them for upper middle class, lower middle class, working class, wherever we want. We can take these standard products, sell them off to bundlers who, again, will securitize them up, sell them off to different investors, pension funds, etc. These are sheltered, yes. People live in them. That is a consequence of this transaction. But the transaction today that our market is sensitive to is their function and role as financial products. We are used to thinking of a home sale as being a what is the product kind of question. The product is a home. It is purchased by the home buyer. But the reality is we need to shift our thinking and recognize that the question is not what is the product, it is who is the product. The product being created when you buy a home is not the house that you buy. It is the mortgage where you pledge decades of your future earnings to something that will be turned into a bond payment that an investor of some type will then purchase. That is the thing that we are hypersensitive to. That is the thing that drives our economy. And that is the underlying device that is being created when you go to purchase a home. Economists have no problem talking about 2000 to 2008 as a housing bubble. If you look back at the time, we called it a bubble. Not during it, but after 2008, we called it a bubble. Economists today will still refer to it as a bubble. Any sense of where we're at today? And I want you to recognize the language we use here, right? Because if you listen to those same economists that called 2000 to 2008 a bubble, those same economists will call what happened subsequent a recovery. They'll say we need housing to recover. Housing is on a path to recovery. Housing is starting to recover. Housing has largely recovered. Recovered to what? We created a massive bubble that did lots and lots of damage, not only to our economy, but to the citizens of this country, to the people, to us. And we have what? Created a recovery to a bubble condition. Our language is so dominated by the thinking and the language that economists use that we struggle to see the absurdity in calling essentially the same market condition by a different name. It might have been moral at the end of the Great Depression or during the Great Depression to make it easier for people to borrow more money, to stay in their house. But the idea today of making it easier for more people to borrow more money, to ultimately pay more for housing, is not the way we get out of this trap. In fact, that is the trap. Just in the last week, there was an article that was published advocating 40-year mortgages. I saw another one this morning when I got up. What we desperately need now to get the housing market going again, to make housing more attainable, to get more people into homes, is a 40-year mortgage. I predicted in the book that the big innovation that we would ultimately see is the 50-year mortgage. The idea that in order for you to get into a home, what we need to do is tap into all of your earnings through all of your working life. This is not the way we help people be successful. And this is no longer a system that lifts people up. It's a system that has become, at its core, predatory. And so what we need to have a conversation about is how we escape out of this system. Now, I'm going to say at the top, as we make this kind of pivot into what we do next, I want to say At Strong Towns, we don't deal with federal policy. We don't deal with state policy. There's all kinds of people having debates there and fighting there. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. We try to stay out of it. What we are really, really focused on is what can we do at the local level with the tools we have, the capacity we have to make a difference. Everything we talk about is focused on mayors, city councils, local leaders, people who are going to step up at the neighborhood level, at the block level to do productive things. So I said these are financial products. I want you to recognize that in a distribution of capital in our economy, the bulk of the capital goes to fund these two financial products. If you are a production home builder and you are building hundreds of homes way out on the third-ring suburbs, there is really no end to the capital you can get your hands on. Monty, true? Yeah. If you want to build this crap over and over and over again, Wall Street will throw tens of millions of dollars at a crack at you. No problem. If you are one of the handful of companies that build the 5/1 or some like derivative product, and it's a shockingly small number of companies that actually do this. Again, you are able to get lots and lots of capital. You have no problem getting the money to finance your projects. And the reason you don't, again, is because these are fantastic financial products. And every time we have any type of financial difficulty, what we do is we pump lots of money into banks, and banks are looking for places to lend. It's easier to lend $20 million than it is $20,000. Because if you lend $20,000, you've got to do it thousands of times to lend $20 million. And so these big projects, these big builders, these big lenders have, in a sense, unlimited amounts of capital they can tap into if they're doing these projects. If we go on the very wealthy end of the spectrum, rich people, and I don't have to say this, but I'm going to make a point, rich people do not have a problem financing their homes. They just don't. They are able to borrow money, they're able to leverage capital, they don't have money, they don't have problems getting capital to build, construct, and finance their homes. Where there is no capital in our system is at this starter end of the spectrum. The low end of the spectrum, the low priced end of the spectrum. There's no capital, there's no real easy way to get capital. If you want to, Monty and I have talked about this before, but we talked about it again today. How many times have you gone in with an incremental project and the bank says, we have no way to finance this? All the time, right? And the reason is not because it's not a good project, and not because there aren't lots and lots of people who would move in, occupy it, pay the rent, and have a cash flow. The reason is because for the local bank, there's no secondary market for them to unload it if they need the cash, if they need to unload it. They would have to hold that product for its duration. There's no capital here to build the types of units that we need built in our economy to actually create affordable housing. What do these units look like? This is a single-family home. I think it's important to note that over half of our families in this country today, or let me say this in a more precise way, over half of our households today are single-person households. Over half of our homes today are single-family homes, homes with multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms. Most of our single-family homes are being occupied by people who have households of one or two people. One or two people are living in homes with 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms. I don't say this to begrudge them of that. I say this as an observation. Because a lot of those people find themselves in very precarious financial positions. I've been using the avatar of kind of an elderly widow, but you can substitute any type of single person you want in this scenario. But I feel like an elderly widow is like an easy way to get your mind around this. An elderly widow sitting in a 4-bedroom house on a fixed income is house rich and cash poor. They may struggle to maintain the yard. In Minnesota, they may struggle to shovel the snow off the sidewalks all winter. They may have difficulty getting to the store. They may just need assistance from time to time. They may need to fix the old roof on the house or do a repair to the furnace or what have you. But they don't have any money. They're on a fixed income. Taxes continue to go up and squeeze them more and more. They feel stuck. Our system today would say, hey, you've got two options. One, sell your house, cash out all your equity, move. I don't want to move. I have all my memories in this house. I lived here, with my kids. We grew up in this place. I go to church up the street. I've got friends in this neighborhood. I don't want to move. Okay, second option, get a reverse mortgage or a home equity loan. Cash out some of this equity and use it to, float your lifestyle. Oh my gosh, I saved all my life to pay off this house. We had a mortgage burning party. That doesn't seem right. It seems like a violation of this code, this trust that I've created. I feel like I don't know enough financially. I'm not sophisticated enough to do that kind of transaction. I feel like I would be taken advantage of. Plus, what am I supposed to do? Just milk my equity till I die? That seems like a really bad way to live. And so what happens is that lots and lots of people are stuck in homes like this until the situation becomes so bad that they are forced to make a large move somewhere that they don't actually want to. What if we allowed someone in this situation to take one of their extra bedrooms and make it into an apartment that they could rent? What if we allowed them, and I know this is going to sound insane, what if we allowed them to put in a kitchenette and an exterior door and rent that unit out? You could do that in a weekend. It would cost you a few $1,000s. It's not that hard to do. Yet, our zoning ordinances don't allow that. Our building code would make that really difficult to do. And for someone in this situation, the real question you have is, who's going to help me do it and how am I going to pay for it? We have millions of people in this country who would love, love, love to turn their extra house into monthly cash flow. But we make it almost impossible for them to do it. This is a backyard cottage. Please stop calling these ADUs. An ADU sounds like a disease that you don't want to catch. When we talk about ADUs, what happens is that normal people just shut their brains off. They're like, oh, you're one of those people. And they stop listening because they put you in a bucket of like crazy housing. A backyard cottage is a way for someone to, again, take extra yard space they have and turn it into monthly cash flow. It's a way for someone to make better use of their property and improve their own financial situation. And when you're advocating for a backyard cottage, don't run around saying, well, California does ADUs and it works out really great, right? What you do is you find the person who wants to build one of these for their, grandmother to live in. You bring them to the board where they're making the decision, and you say, hey, here's Johnny. He's a nice guy. He owns this house. His grandma would like to live in the backyard. She wants her independence. She wants, the decency and respect of having her own place. How about we allow a cottage here? And guess what? People will say yes, because they always do. And then when grandma is no longer there and they rent it out to someone else, people will flip out, right? No, they won't. We have to introduce these things to, I had a conversation with the Better Block people today, and it was really nice. It was very cordial. Better Block, by the way, another astounding national resource you have here locally. I mean, the impact that group has had nationwide is amazing. We're having this discussion there about, how do we go about changing the ordinances for everybody across the whole city to allow ADUs in every lot? And the answer was, stop, don't do it. If this neighborhood is ready to do ADUs, but this neighborhood is not, go do backyard cottages here. Let's go have that conversation. Let's make it very personal. Let's make it very human. Let's make it very like neighbor to neighbor. We're going to do this. Let's actually bring people up and let people look at them and like, look, come here. Like, look, stand up here. You're a look. This is a very nice, pleasant, beautiful person. They're going to live in in a backyard cottage. Would anyone object to that? Of course not. Do that over and over and over again. Don't make it an abstraction, make it a real thing, right? Make it a real thing. These are units that we can build at scale, and they will have a massive, massive impact. This is a starter house. Don't call it a tiny house. Don't make this a fetish, right? Like, oh, cute little tiny houses. Here's a cluster of tiny houses. Don't build them in a cluster. A tiny house is a fetish. A starter house is literally like the basis, the foundation of every human civilization up until modern times. People always, through history, built the house they could afford. Then, when they had some more money, they would add on. They would add on. A kid was born, they put on a second story. They would continue to add on. We can go through your neighborhoods here, and we can look at them, and we will see the starter homes that exist throughout your community. A lot of them are no longer 400, 500, 600 square feet. They've been added on to. They're now 1,200 square feet or 2,000 square feet. But they started with that little house, right? The idea that we wouldn't take every large lot and allow people to cut it up and put the small house in the back, put the starter house between two other houses, fit them in every place where they could go. This is something that is ridiculously simple to do. And when you do it, no one will recognize. If someone lived in the neighborhood, moved out, came back 5 years later, and you had 20 more of these starter houses in your neighborhood, no one would notice. No one would even recognize that they would fit in perfectly. Let me ask you a question. How many of you would like to live in a 400, 500, 600 square foot house? There's a handful of you. How many of you have lived in a 400, 500, 600 square foot house? Right? Many, many, many more. When we eliminate this starter rung of the ladder, what we do is we make it impossible for broad swaths of our population to fully participate in our society. There is no reason why we can't go out and build these again at scale. So at Strong Towns, we have 3 steps to escaping the housing trap, and they are all based on the idea that we need to build thousands, millions of these entry-level units. We need to flood the market, so to speak, with units that would be very, very cheap and very, very affordable. Recognize, we're not taking on Fannie Freddie, we're not taking on Goldman Sachs, we're not trying to end the 30-year mortgage, we're not trying to change the financial system. We have to live within that. But what the financial system does not have today is a competitor. What we can do is we can create a separate competitive market. A competitive market for entry-level units. And so that everybody can afford to get into a home. And then the question for the market that we have today is, when do you move up to a bigger house? When do you move up into that other market? And that is something that you can then do from a position of strength, not a position of desperation or a feeling of getting left behind. So at Strong Towns, we have 3 steps. The first step is we need to reform our codes and our regulations. The second step is we need to build an ecosystem of incremental developers. And the third step is we need to localize finance. I'm going to talk about each of these, and then we'll wrap up and do whatever questions or whatever else you all want to chat about. At Strong Towns, we have a saying: no neighborhood can be exempt from change. No neighborhood should experience radical change. These are 3 images of my hometown, about 30 years apart, the same street. And you'll see that the street changes over time. The marketing brochure of this post-war suburban experiment really was founded on static neighborhoods. Neighborhoods before the Great Depression were always dynamic. They would always start small and then thicken up and grow and change and evolve over time. You would literally start with little shacks and could end up with Manhattan. It was a continuum of improvement. Post-war, we said, we are going to build your neighborhood perfect, we're going to build it all at once, and we're going to build it to a finished state. And from that point forward, it will not change. That is our promise to you. We will lock it in place with zoning, we'll lock it in place with financing, we will not allow it to change or evolve in any way. And then the grand bargain we would create is that if the neighborhoods eventually fell apart, which in a static model, they all eventually will, whatever neighborhood was kind of the most disenfranchised or had like the least kind of clout or the least going for it, that would become the neighborhood that we preyed upon. This is, in a sense, the grand bargain now that I hear a lot of the YIMBY crowd talking about. YIMBY is the opposite of NIMBY. NIMBY is the not in my backyard, I'm going to oppose all this. The YIMBY is the yes in my backyard. And oftentimes the kind of pragmatism of the YIMBY is to say, well, okay, your neighborhood is disenfranchised, it's run down, and all that. Sorry, we'll try to get you some affordable units, but we're going to take your single-family homes and transform them into, massive, massive buildings because we need housing. In exchange for you all agreeing to do that here, you all don't have to have any change in your neighborhood. This is dysfunctional in two ways. One, static neighborhoods don't work. They actually need to evolve and change. They need to be able to respond to stress, to opportunity. They need to be able to thicken up over time. The other side of the dysfunction is that in the neighborhood that we're transforming, we turn it into a repository of speculators and slumlords. People who the prices artificially get jacked up, people get dislocated, and the slumlords kind of ride that slope of decline down until they can get that big payout at the end. This is a dysfunctional way to build cities. It's a dysfunctional way to build culture and community. The grand bargain we would replace this with is this one. No neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood can be exempt from change. Everywhere, all the time, we need to be able to thicken up our neighborhoods. We need to be able to make them better places. If you live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory friction that would prevent your neighborhood from evolving into a neighborhood of duplexes over the next decade or two. The grand bargain that we would make then is also you don't have to worry about your neighborhood becoming the neighborhood you crave. The neighborhood where the speculators come in, the neighborhoods where the slumlords come in, and where everybody gets dislocated and you have property values go berserk. The standard that we have set is that at city halls, it should be so simple to build the next thing that you should be able to show up at 9 a.m. with a completed permit application and walk up by noon with permission to build. It's funny because some places I go, they're like, oh yeah, and some places they laugh. I am serious. There is absolutely no reason why, if you walk into City Hall and you want to build a backyard cottage, that we can't make that approval almost instantaneously. There's no reason why, if you walk into City Hall and you want to take that bedroom and convert it into an apartment, that approval can't be almost instantaneous. There really is no reason why we have so much regulatory friction. The idea that someone wanting to do something small and reasonable in their place, and we should subject them to months and months of public hearings, having to go talk to all their neighbors and beg permission, having to go genuflect in front of the planning board, getting an approval and then a denial. These things are absurd. And what they do is they squash the market for doing this kind of stuff. We have to make it as simple as possible to do the next incremental thing. Now, if someone wants to come in and build a 5/1, if someone wants to come in and raise a neighborhood and put in a Costco, put that person through 5 years of permitting hell. I don't really care. Just make it really, really, really easy to do the urgent, needed, and necessary thing. Related, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, but we can't have parking requirements if we're serious about wanting housing. The two things are just not compatible. And let me put it this way, because I feel like this is the best way to think about this. Today, we have parking minimums, and we refuse to get rid of them because we are very, very sensitive to the potential difficulty of someone trying to find a place to park and not being able to, or having to park a distance away, be it 100 feet, a block, 2 blocks from where they want to be. We are very sensitive to that pain. involved in doing that. We are insensitive to the pain that people are experiencing by not being able to afford homes. I think we need to reverse that sensitivity. I think we should be way more sensitive to the idea that we need to build a lot more housing and make it a lot more affordable, and we should be less sensitive to the discomfort with having to walk half a block, 2 blocks to get to your destination. I think that's a trade-off worth making. Get rid of your parking. We need to create an ecosystem of incremental developers. It's funny because a lot of times people will say, well, Chuck, is this really necessary? Like, let's just fix the zoning code and like all this stuff will take care of itself. And I think there's a case to be made that if we fix the zoning code over time, incremental developers will show up and start working because they do. But what I'm talking about is having a fire underneath, is having an urgency. How do we go out and get this done? How do we get it done at scale? How do we get it done quick? How do we respond to the idea that we are in a housing crisis? What we need to do is we need to nurture an ecosystem of incremental developers. In the book, we write about Monty. We write about South Bend, Indiana. We write about places where they have done this. And they do this not by some crazy magic. They do this by literally getting people together. People who are interested in doing this kind of work. People who walk down the street and see the house that's kind of in disrepair and think, gosh, someone could fix that. Someone needs to fix that up. Maybe that someone is me. The person who sees the building that has more potential, or the vacant lot, and says, I think I could do something about that. These people are a little bit crazy. We all understand that love makes you do crazy things. And what I've seen with incremental developers is they fall in love with projects, and then they are willing to do crazy things. It's a very different kind of financial calculation than a big home builder, a production home builder, right? You're laughing because you've experienced this, right? It's not that they don't make money, but they value the return in more than money. And I'm going to tell you, I spent the day looking intimately at some of the projects that Monty has done here. And the thing that you get in every turn is you get love. Let me show you this thing. Let me tell you about this person. Let me tell you their story. This person lives in the neighborhood and started out here, and they were only doing this much business, and now they're doing this much. Look at this plethora of success stories. Look at this person who didn't have a home, and we started them on small, and now they've moved up to here. It is story after story after story that has a financial return, yes, but it's a financial return added to a return on kind of love invested. I'm not trying to nostalgize incremental developers and hold them up as like saints, but I am telling you that production home builders will not build the homes that you want. You are going to have a hard time finding people to do this kind of work unless we make a concerted effort to nurture them. Can I ask I want one of you two to come up just for a second and talk about the group that you have that meets here. Can you? Because here's the thing. Most communities do not have a group. The way you create local developers, incremental developers, is you actually get them together and have them talk to each other. Because being an incremental developer is solving a whole bunch of problems, and those developers might know how to solve 2 or 3 of them, but they don't know how to solve 2 or 3 of the others. And when they get them together with people who, oh yeah, I figured that one out, I don't know this one, they help each other, right? Talk about the group then.
So we have a group that meets right here, and they're meeting in different parts of the country too. It's the 12 steps of town making. So it's just like a support group. We meet here twice a month, every second and fourth Tuesday at 5:30. And basically it's a group of people that just care about their community, and they're interested in making it better, and they're builders. And some of them are builders, and some of them are just community activists, some of them are architects, some of them are dog groomers, and they just come together and talk about it. And these are groups that are going on in South Bend right now, in Kansas City, in Lafayette, Louisiana, Buffalo, New York, and some other place. But anyway, they're happening, and they're just there to support each other. And that's the opposite of what we see in this business. Of nobody ever give me the secret handshake up front. So if you didn't have money, or you weren't born in a certain part of town, or you didn't go to a certain school here, you didn't get that secret hand. And that's what this is about. is sharing that secret handshake.
How many do we have here? How many people have attended a 12-step meeting here? Raise your hands high so that people can find you later and ask you how to join them.
Well, let me take it one step further, because this is the question that I always get. It's like, okay, Chuck, this is really cute, but who are these developers? And I try to explain, sometimes it is the dog groomer who wants a side gig. Sometimes it's a teacher who, does this during the summer. Sometimes it's just someone who's underemployed. Sometimes it's someone who's crazy, who's like, I'm willing to work evenings and weekends to make this happen. Here's the question. How many of you in this room have considered or would consider being an incremental developer if you had a little bit of assistance and a little bit of financial support to make it happen? How many of you would consider doing that? I mean, look around. There is an abundance of people in your community ready to do this work. And there's little obstacles that keep them on the sidelines. We can eliminate those obstacles, and the first way to eliminate them is getting people together. Just get them together, get them talking, get them giving each other the secret handshake. And here's the thing, incremental developers compete with each other. They do. But it's a friendly competition, right? They're supporting each other because at the end of the day, what they are competing with is the big market. They're providing a different product, and they're competing with the big market. We need more of their product to make the other market the same. All right, the third thing we need to do then is localized finance. And it's interesting because nothing I'm going to show you next is anywhere near as radical as the insane financial things that our macro system does every day. We are in this big housing bubble right now, and there's a lot of debate over its many causes. It is certainly a supply problem. It's also a finance problem. It's also a regulatory problem. There's a whole bunch of things that have added up to this current bubble that we have. But one of the fascinating things about any financial bubble is that there's a certain fog of war quality around it. You can listen to some of the top economists in the country in 2006, 2007 saying there's no housing bubble, there might be a little bit of froth in a couple markets, but nothing big here. And then 18 months later they were saying, oh my gosh, that was a huge bubble that just burst. We gotta do something. What I'm going to tell you now, what I'm going to share with you now, how do I put this in the right way? Might seem a little scary and radical. I'm going to tell you that from a financial standpoint, these are very simple tools, and it is radically simpler than what is done today in mortgage finance, and none of this involves any appreciable risk by us, by local government, really by anyone. So let me start with, I think, the simplest one, which is a micro-grant program we came across in Oswego, New York. Oswego, New York. I always say it like I'm Minnesota. In Oswego, New York, they had neighborhoods that were in decline. Neighborhoods that were struggling, that needed a little bit of love and needed a little bit of TLC. One of the things that they found is that people really liked their own house and they liked their neighborhood, but they didn't think that anybody else did. And they didn't have confidence that if they spent time and money and energy making the neighborhood better, that time and money and energy would have a payoff. And so they came up with this micro-grant program. What they did is they said, we will pay 50% reimbursement, and they had caps on the dollar amounts. But we'll do up to 50% reimbursement for any change, any improvement you make to your home that is visible from the street. So if you do something internal, do something in the backyard, not eligible, it's got to be visible from the street. We want people to be able to see it. And you can't apply as an individual. You can only apply as a block. And in the block, you've got to have 70% or more of the homeowners participating in order to qualify. What this did is it lubricated a conversation. Because now people who are interested, like, I would like to repaint my house, I can get half the cost reimbursed, but I got to go talk to all these people on my block and get them interested in doing a project. And what they would have is that people would go door to door and they would say, here's what I'd like to do. And then the other person would say, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to do something too, but I was holding back. And all of a sudden, all these conversations meant people stopped holding back. They started to realize that if we all put money in together, this neighborhood will get better. And magically, what would happen is that one block, bam, seemingly overnight, in one summer, one block would become better. That signaled to everybody else in the neighborhood that something was going on. Then the next summer, bam, 2 blocks were transformed. And pretty soon what you saw is that people didn't wait for the grant money. They started to believe in their own neighborhood again, and they took their own money and their own time and their own energy, and they put it into fixing up their own property. They had what they called a bank run on confidence. And what they wanted to do was stop the bank run and give people confidence in their place. And it took tiny amounts of money to do it. In Muskegon, Michigan, they have used tax increment financing to help buy down the cost of starter homes. Tax increment financing is a tool that you may have heard of. It is probably the most widely misused economic development tool that there is. Chad and I might slightly disagree on some of that, but it's widely misused. Often these are handouts for large developers and large corporations to do projects that would probably happen anyway, but they can make City A do it if they're competing with City B, that kind of thing. What they've done in Muskegon is they've got very specific criteria. They don't want to lose money either. But what they've said is that if you have a lot that is on public utilities, so it's served with city sewer and water, and it has been there for 2 decades or more, so it is clearly the market is not naturally developing this lot. We will use tax increment financing to help you lower the cost of a starter home. It's got to be 1,000 square feet, it might be 1,100 square feet or less. So it's got to be, we're not doing big mansions here, small. Here's how tax increment financing works in short. If you are paying this much tax today, you go out and build a new home and you're paying this much tax after you're done because the property's risen in value. That amount is called the increment. That's the tax increment. What the city does is the city takes a loan and then uses that money to pay back the loan. When they take the loan, they use the money that they get up front for that loan to buy down the cost of your house. So if you are getting into a $100,000 house, they will pay down $15,000 of it, and then you have an $85,000 house. That kind of thing. They have built dozens of homes like this, and gotten a lot of people into homes at much more affordable, much lower prices. Of course, they write in to the contract. If you flip the house, you've got to pay it all back at once. If you stay there the full life of the loan, you get all the equity, that kind of thing. So it's a promotion for people who want to live in the community, invest in the community, and be there in a starter home capacity. In California, they have gotten really, really good at building backyard cottages. They have had a statewide push to do this. And because of that, the banks have altered the way that they finance these things. There's enough of a market of people doing them where they've actually been able to make that market rather liquid. Today in California, if you go to a used car lot, someone will come out with a clipboard and say, hey, you want to buy that car, just sign here and you can drive it home. If you go to an accessory dwelling unit lot, you can pick out a backyard cottage. Someone will be there with a clipboard, you can sign it, and in 60 days you'll have a unit in your backyard ready to be rented out, and then you'll start making payments after that. They've got the financing down so slick, but these are literally now impulse buys. In Minnesota, we are able to use special assessments for housing. We think of special assessments as being the city goes out and builds a road and then assesses you the cost of that road, and you would pay that assessment on your taxes. The city goes out and builds a sewer line or a water line in front of your place, and they assess you that cost. In Minnesota and in other states, and I don't know about Texas, but this is a tool that's available that we could adopt. You can use special assessments to build housing. If you want to put that backyard cottage in, the city can, in a sense, go borrow that money. Ideally, they would be doing many, many of these at once, so they borrow money. They then lend you that money in an assessment, and then twice a year when you pay your property taxes will be higher until you pay that loan off. This is a way for that senior citizen I mentioned earlier, who's worried about getting the reverse mortgage or the equity loan and doesn't want to go, like, how do we go talk to a local bank? How do we get that financing? This is a way for the financing to be really, really quick and really, really cheap. Cities can borrow at lower interest rates than almost anybody else. And so it's very easy for the city to finance these things at scale at very low price. And here's the cool thing about it, and this goes with the tax increment financing too. When you take on a first mortgage, and then you take on a second mortgage, if you default on that, the first mortgage gets made whole, and if there's any money left over, the second mortgage gets made whole. If the city does a special assessment, or the city does tax increment financing, they jump in front of the first mortgage. So if there's any default in the system, the city gets paid back first. In other words, there is very, very, very little risk that the city, aka the taxpayer, will ultimately lose any money. This one is slightly more risky, but again, we're talking about small units and small amount of money. Cities, we see them all the time giving away hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to try to subsidize a unit here, a unit there. In Florida, we have seen cities do something that scales much, much, much better. They have been co-signing on loans with the bank. So the bank is, we're worried about this product, we don't necessarily want to issue this product, we don't have a liquid market for it, we can't unload it if things go bad. The city can go in, or we've seen philanthropic organizations go in and say, like Grandpa co-signing your car loan, your first car loan, right? They would go in and say, we want to see this project happen, this is an important one, we will co-sign that loan. If the loan's paid off in full, the city does not lose, I mean, it costs the city nothing, right? There's literally no money involved with this transaction. If the transaction does go bad for some reason, the city has the ability to put a lien, create security, and essentially protect themselves. There are many, many, many other ways of doing this. This is a little taste. I show you this because I want you to recognize that when we're working at this small capital scale, when we're working at entry-level products, the city can finance lots and lots of these units. They can do it in ways that cities are used to financing the Costco and the big project and the ridiculous investment over here. We're just talking about retooling those same tools to build housing. And not luxury housing, not expensive, entry-level housing. We can do this at scale, we can do this at low cost, and we can do this without risking any taxpayer money, with the taxpayer not having to spend any money. This feeling of helplessness that I started with tonight, it is a feeling that we impose on ourselves. When we recognize that we have tools and capacity, that there are ways for us to actually go out and affect this crisis. It has a liberating feeling, right? Everybody in this room has the capacity to be part of the solution. We can go reform our codes. We don't have to do Austin's code next and rewrite everything. We can do it a little neighborhood over here and a little neighborhood over here and get it moving. We can hold up the example and use that as the way to kind of move this narrative along. We don't have to fight with the NIMBYs over here. We don't have to fight with the wealthy people over here. We can do this in ways that lifts neighborhoods up. We can create an ecosystem of incremental developers, people who are living in our community today, who love this place, who will, yes, make money doing these transactions, but will also do the transactions with respect and love that comes from being part of a neighborhood. We can do these at scale. And the city has the capacity to take the tools they already use, the tools they are already good at using, the tools they use over and over and over again to do things that are generally really bad and destructive. They have the capacity to take those tools and refine them and use them to build these entry-level units. If we do these things, these very simple things, we will find that we do not feel helpless at all. And we will also find that we can radically transform our own local market, give lots and lots of people opportunities to get in houses, to be safe, to be secure, to have that capacity to rent at an affordable price or own a home at an affordable price, get started, and grow from starting with very little to ultimately starting with something, ending up with something else. We have the capacity to build strong towns. We have the capacity to escape the housing trap. The only thing we lack is the will to go out and do it. So I'm encouraging all of you, go be that change. Thank you everybody for being here today. If this is interesting to you, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for that generosity. We have 3 books out now. You can get them at any local bookstore. They are available everywhere. If you are interested in this conversation, Strong Towns, our website is strongtowns.org. We're publishing new articles every day. We've got 3 different podcast streams. We've got a bunch of different video streams. We're on every social media platform. All of our stuff is free to access, free to use, and licensed so you can share it on your own terms. We don't even require that you credit us. If I wrote something cool and you really like it, you can forward it to pretend you wrote it. That's perfectly fine. We're trying really, really hard to share this message. I always tell people, if this was inspirational to you in any way, the best thing that you can do for us is to go tell someone who wasn't here about it. As Monty said at the beginning, we're growing this movement. Kevin referred to this too. We have thousands of members around the world. We have hundreds of local groups working to make their places stronger. We rely completely on word of mouth. If this is inspiring to you, just go tell someone else in your own words what mattered to you tonight. If you really, really are interested in supporting Strong Towns, we are a 501c3, we're a nonprofit, we're a member-driven organization. Membership is whatever you can afford. So literally we have people that pay us $1 and they are members. But whatever you can afford, we are building a big movement to change the world. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have. I don't know how long we get to stay in this room.
Grant said it's okay. We're going to do like 15 minutes of Q&A.
So I'll take a couple questions here first. And then, yeah. Yeah, backyard cottages. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the city loses money. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Chuck, can you summarize in 30 seconds what he just said for everybody?
He said when you build more housing and the property values go up and your taxes go up, they are rebating that with a 10x multiplier on it. I hear you. Let me say, I love the inspiration for that. Let me push back a little bit, because in my city, I live in Brainerd, Minnesota. It's a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's a small town. In my city, we are undertaking a huge project to build an 80-unit, 5/1 kind of mega project. I hate it. Everything about it is horrible. They got a federal grant to buy down, federal housing subsidy. They got a state housing subsidy. They got a regional housing subsidy. The city's waiving all the sewer and water charges. The city's giving them tax increment financing for 20 years. We're pouring every subsidy we can into this. And out of the end, we are getting 80 units, 12 of them, which will be 75% MHI. So 75%, 12 of them will be affordable, right? For 15 years. Affordable. We did a study, and the study said we have a shortage in our market of 3,300 affordable units. We are moving heaven and earth financially to build 12. There's no way our current approach scales to 3,300. And so the discipline that I think we have to have, city governments have to not lose money doing this. Because if they lose money doing this, there's a finite amount of these that they can do. And we need lots of them. And so we have to discipline ourselves to do things where cities don't lose money doing it. I'm not saying the city has to make money, but the city has to be able to cash flow this transaction over and over again. Cities have the capacity to borrow insane amounts of money, way more money than they should be able to borrow. Really. Cities can use that capacity to do good, but they can't use that capacity to lose money. Because if they lose money, everybody gets screwed, including the people who are now in those homes. Please. You're going to have to stand up though and talk louder.
Hello. So the DFW area, or metro area, is growing at more than 100,000 people per year,
Yeah.
which is quite unique in the U.S. But a lot of towns are shrinking, where we're growing like crazy, and so it's caused a lot of unique issues here. But I was just wondering if you could speak to, some of the strategies that apply in this kind of a market versus like a shrinking town that needs to be revitalized.
Yeah. So I'm going to look at you again, Monty. What happens when a business is growing, but losing money on every transaction that they do?
Go bankrupt.
How long does it take though? If you could accelerate your growth, you could go for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. All
Yes.
you gotta do is watch
Yes.
we crash. You'll see.
Exactly. Exactly.
You can go for a really, but growth just grows same. It never
works. We had this conversation today because we had one council member we met with who was kind of pushing us, like, you need to market more, you need to grow. And Monty was kind of like, well, I want to make sure that when we grow, we've got a certain amount of stability here, and that like we don't, do this and then fall back again, because that wrecks your business. People get hurt, right, when you do that. I feel like what the curse you have here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is that your cities are all insolvent. Your cities are all like functionally bankrupt. They know it, but it's easier to not deal with it. And because you are experiencing broad growth, it is like a tranquilizer for the pain, right? You still have annual budget pain where you're like, oh, we don't have enough money to do the things we have to do. We'll put off this urgent project for 2 years, and we'll borrow this money over here, which seems crazy, but we're going to do it. And we'll put off this thing that we need to do. Those are all like symptoms of dysfunction, like financial dysfunction. The fact that your area is growing allows you to tolerate financial dysfunction longer and deeper than other places that don't have as much growth. And I've said this every time I've come to Dallas, every time I've come to Texas, and people don't like it, but I'm going to say it again to you. You like to dislike California, and you like to think you're better than California, and you like to look down your nose at California. I've seen the bumper stickers. I wasn't born here, but I got here as soon as I could, right? You are California 20 years behind them. Everything that California is doing today is stuff you will do in 20 years. Everything they did 20 years ago is all the stuff you're doing right now. You're on the same exact trajectory. You are, I go to California, and they say, hey, we're growing. Yeah, but like this and this and this. Yeah, I know that's bad, but we're growing. And the growth is like the thing that always numbs the pain. You have to look deeper. And so I don't have like a special strategy for you because you're drunk with growth. I feel like Kevin, like you do interventions with cities is what I would call it, right? Like cities call you when you're like, we know we have a problem. You come and do an intervention for us, and you guys do that. To me, I have talked to city officials in Dallas enough. I've talked to your staff enough. I'm going to spend time with them tomorrow. I think people know that intervention is badly needed. It's just how you actually do it. Because understand, part of the problem is that the system is not functioning. But a bigger part of the problem is that culturally, we have expectations that are out of alignment with reality. And so we could have every council member say, we're 100% in on strong towns. Like, this is the greatest thing we need to do. And if every staff member is saying, we're all in on this bottom-up incremental stuff, like, let's go out and do it, they will all get voted out and fired in the next election cycle because our broad culture is not on board. That's the biggest challenge you have.
Let me ask a version of this question, which
Okay.
is, Kevin said that you know how to say complicated things in a more simplified way. And you distill down a lot in an hour. But you have expertise that I could regurgitate given 5 hours, much less 5 minutes of someone's time. So what is the elevator pitch for the way in which a municipal government, it sounds like it's the only one that can interview with this financial model in this way.
Yeah.
Are they the only ones that can do this?
Well, philanthropy has a role. I mean, philanthropy can co-sign loans, and philanthropy can do some of this, but local governments are the only ones that can do it at scale. And so you're like, what's the elevator pitch to local government? If you are serious that you are in a housing crisis, you have to be part of the solution. And to be part of the solution, you need to do 3 things. You need to make it super easy to build starter units, ridiculously easy. You need to nurture an ecosystem of people who would actually do that construction. And you need to, at scale, without losing any money, finance that because there's no mechanism to finance it in the market today. That's what you need to do. Please, back there.
So one of the questions I get a lot, because DFW is a bigger, expansive area, is we've gotten to this point where people who are young like me, or even younger, are being born in, like, I used to not Frisco until people start saying, well, I was born in Frisco. And so, when now there's people who are like 18, 19 years old, who are born in Sherman, born in Seneca. And so, when they ask me, so the question I get occasionally is, if there's someone who is born into these very sprawling, very unsustainable towns and cities, should they be advised to stick with it and be like that person who turns it around, or should they be advised to like move to a nicer city or a more hopeful city? Like, now that we have so many people being born into that situation across Texas, what's the strategy you would suggest people looking at where they are?
Okay. Thanks for turning this to what perhaps is the most depressing topic. I wrote in my first book that at some point every city is going to experience financial distress. And I tried to describe it in this way because it's unfathomable for people who live in Frisco or who live in Allen or whatever the cool suburb is at the moment. It's impossible for them to visualize a world where they're not on top, right? Where their place is not like the place to be. The same could be said of everybody who lived in inner city Detroit in the 1920s, which was an astounding place to be. If you lived in inner city Detroit in the 1920s, you had a world-class opera house up the street from you. You had amazing transit facilities. You had trains that would take you all over the country. You had a city hall that was like 20 stories tall and massively ornate. You had public libraries all over that looked like museums. You had beautiful housing stock throughout all your neighborhoods, built by some of like the wealthiest people in the world. You lived in one of the 5 wealthiest cities in the world in the 1920s. And 50 years later, it completely fallen apart. Everybody had abandoned it and walked away from it. And they walked away from it, and I think we can talk about like all the various reasons why. I'm going to give you what I think is at the core of why. They walked away from it when they had the capacity to do so because it was a better financial investment in the 1950s and 60s to live out in a suburb than it was to stay in a neighborhood that people were abandoning. So everybody with means did that. When roads aren't maintained, when sewer systems aren't maintained, when water is intermittent, and we could go on and on and on with like when you call the police department and nobody shows up for 2 hours, when the fire emergency goes out and nobody shows up, those places become uninhabitable. And if we look at the kind of underlying features of most of what we have built post World War II, and quite frankly, it gets more and more and more disaggregated over time. Like the stuff we built in the last 10 years is less financially productive than the stuff we built 10 years before that. That stuff is less financially productive than the stuff we built in the 90s. We get further out, more spread out, less income with more stuff, more obligation. There will reach a point where those places are uninhabitable, just by the sheer math of them. And I feel like the question that I would struggle with as a person is, what is the path to this place continuing to exist when we reach that point? I'm always loath to give advice. I think advice is cheap, and I don't think you should ever ask anyone for advice. I think if you really want, you should ask someone like, what did you do? And I'll tell you what I did. When I was a young engineer, my wife and I built a house out in the middle of nowhere. We got a 5-acre lot, we built a house, a resort bought the land around us and built a golf course, and I found myself living on a golf course with a big 5-acre lot. I started doing all this engineering work, life was grand, things were going great, and I started to question the finances. And I ultimately got to a place, well, fast forward 15 years, to where I was doing this strong towns work. And it was incompatible. What I looked around and saw was incompatible with my understanding of reality. And so my wife and I now live in the middle of the town on a small lot with a house built in 1914, 6 blocks from the downtown, and 5 blocks from my office. I walk everywhere. I drive to the airport to fly places, otherwise my car never goes anywhere. I just walk and bike places. That has worked for me. If I lived in Frisco today, I would want one of two things. I would want to see Frisco become a more dynamic place where you could build a lot more incremental stuff, close especially to a core walkable downtown, which I know they've tried to create. I know that there's a major transit stop there too. They're trying to, if I can get connected to these things, that maybe offers me a path to viability when things become hard. If I don't see those things happening, I want to move to a neighborhood that has a better opportunity of creating and developing those things. You have a lot of historic neighborhoods in this community that are undervalued, that have a lot of potential. I fear that, you look at like the Bishop Arts District, which I think is fantastic, but I'm going to say this not completely informed the way you are of all the things that have gone on in Bishop Arts. I feel like one of the downside of Bishop Arts is it's just become radically expensive. And it's become radically expensive because it has become a place that has been loved, but is not dynamic enough to respond to that love. I want to find a place that has that dynamism.
Hey, Chuck.
Last
Can I
question.
add on that? To kind of hit both of those for a second for the Metroplex. And this goes back to kind of the story I was telling in the intro of what I saw kind of 2010, 2011 happening in the Metroplex. But if you think about DFW overall and you look at Dallas and then first ring, second ring, third ring, there's an opportunity to tie in the young folks. What we see in a lot of the cities that we're working with, the first ring suburbs of Dallas are starting to experience the initial signs of decline that Chuck's talking about, right? The neighborhoods that went through the growth in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you go around
the pretty advanced.
Right, right. And then you go out to the second ring and they're a little bit newer. You go out to the third ring and they're brand new. What's interesting in talking with the younger generations is we're starting to hear some of those kids say, I grew up in a suburb, I cannot wait to get out of here, right? And they are looking, the younger generations are starting to look for, I can't afford a 3,000 square foot, starter home, for 300 grand. They're looking for opportunities like this. They're also interested in starting a business. They're also interested in this incremental development model. And so my answer to you in Frisco would be, don't try to change a place that is so committed to the auto-centric kind of newer model of development, but come into Dallas, come into places like Garland. There are communities that are very hungry for that group to breathe new life into those neighborhoods. We're working with Garland right now, and I would tell them, go find folks like you that want to come in and kind of build and cultivate a new neighborhood. It's a marketing pitch. I think we're just on the early stages of it. But if Garland wants to salvage and revitalize a lot of those existing neighborhoods, they've got the bones to be places like Bishop Arts. The other end of the spectrum is Bishop Arts gentrified so fast because they built such a great place. We need so much more like that, but you have to think, so look at the core, look at the first ring places, and go reinvest in those places and in the Metroplex. And we run into it all the time with Texas. We will never be like a Detroit or a Shreveport or a Memphis. We absolutely are. It's gonna happen faster, because what do we do in Texas? We grow faster and harder and bigger. I remember the very first time I ever brought Chuck to town. I picked him up from the airport in his shorts in the snow.
Yeah.
But we're driving around, and Chuck is looking at the high five and the tollway, all the interchanges and the retaining walls and all that. And he kept saying, like, how in the world are y'all gonna pay for this? How in the world? Like, I mean, you must have said it 5 times in 50
No, I know. I was astounded because the thing is, like, I've come here as a tourist before, but I haven't come here. You drove me. I remember going through the high five for the first time. Like,
Hey, but it won a ton of awards.
right. No, I'm sure. What that is, and here's what, I know there's a lot of pride here about, like, we're big, the high five is big and stupid. We had a problem that we created, and instead of solving it in a sophisticated way, we solved it in a brute force way. And that is impressive, because it's impressive to do things that are big and brutal, right, in a way. But the paperclip is one of the most elegant inventions ever. The Post-it note is an elegant invention, not because it is big and brutal, but because it is a genius symbol. That's what I feel like the commitment to big gets us done.
Last question.
Last question. Did you already ask one?
Not yet.
You didn't.
No.
Okay, go for it
Maybe
then.
on either side.
Okay.
So it's cool to see that the first step of escaping the housing crowd is zoning reform.
Yeah.
Dallas just revised their land use plan for Dallas 2.0.
Yeah.
We had to fight like hell for just to keep duplexes and triplexes.
Uh-huh.
And so my question is, in the face of fierce opposition like that,
Yeah.
have you found any arguments that wins folks over for that are convinced that variety in housing is a bad thing, whether it's crime,
No.
whether it's flooding, whether
No.
it's
There's no. But let's be very clear about this. Humans are emotional species. We think that we are very rational. None of us are rational. None of us are. Zero, myself included. There's a great book by Daniel Kahneman called Thinking, Fast and Slow. It's about this thick. You will start reading it, and it is two psychologists who would walk together and come up with these mental experiments to try to discover, are humans rational or not? And every time they would lay out an experiment that they would do, and I would say, like, I know how this is going to go because I'm rational, right? And then the experiment would work out the exact opposite of what you thought, over and over and over again. So you get to the end of the book and you're almost crying, because the book reveals that we are slightly evolved chimpanzees. That's what we are. And so it is impossible to convince people of things that they don't want to believe. It is impossible to convince people they don't want to. And we hear this stuff about, like, oh, this person said this without evidence, or like, this person fake news or making this up or whatever. And we're all frustrated because, like, how can you believe that? And the answer is, they want to believe that. And there are things that you want to believe that are also irrational. We all believe things because we want to. Jonathan Haidt wrote a number of books. The Righteous Mind is my favorite one. But he said, your brain is like a press secretary for your heart. And what happens is that you desire something, you want something, and then your brain explains why. It's not that your brain figures out something and then tells your heart what to think. Okay? So, at the end of the day, there is no incantation, there is no set of phrases that we can say that will convince scared NIMBYs to support housing diversity. It just won't happen. What we have to do is we have to go we have to first of all avoid that fight. Because I tell people all the time, don't bring facts to an emotions fight. You will lose every time. We have to avoid that fight. We have to have the conversation in safe places on high ground. So I had you stand up earlier because that was avatar of like, this neighborhood is ready to change and evolve. This neighborhood is ready to add duplexes and triplexes. This neighborhood is ready to add backyard cottages. They're ready to do it in a way that respects everybody there, it is desired by everybody there. Maybe it's like 1 in 100 places in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that they're ready to do it. Let's find the stories in that place so we can get it approved and going there. Not everywhere. We don't want to use them as the story to convince your neighborhood to do it. We want to use your story from your neighborhood to convince your neighborhood that this is okay. Once it's working there, then your neighborhood may be like, you know what, this isn't really scary, just look at them. They're normal people, like look at their neighborhood, it's pretty nice, and then we can do that. And what you do is you have to calm everybody's inner elephant and get it so it's not rampaging. And then you can talk to their brain. A lot of Strong Towns approach is about bottom up, because bottom up is how we make real change. It's how we humanize it. It's how we get it into our hearts and not just like make a brain argument. Engineers, planners like to think that they deal in the rational when they actually deal deeply in the emotional. They fool themselves first, and then they try to fool others. We have to be smarter than that and recognize what we're actually doing is a deeply cultural, emotional thing. And we have to start with that recognition. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. Awesome presentation. Thank you to Dallas Habitat. Thank you to Verdunity and Options Real Estate. And thank you all for coming out. On a Wednesday night, we packed this place with 100 people a week after adopting Forward Dallas. Thank you all for being here. If you took photos or videos tonight, post them on your social media, tag Dallas Housing Coalition or any of the other sponsors tonight. We'd love to reshare what's going on and the movement, again, that we're creating here. Second, if you signed up on Eventbrite, or if you did not sign up on Eventbrite and you're here, please check in at the front so we can stay in touch with y'all via email. We'll add you to our communications and newsletters list. We also brought 50 of these yard signs, and I don't want to go home with any one of them. I don't have a car to take in there. So help us by putting these in your yard. You might have seen different yard signs in people's yards leading up to Forward Dallas. The issues that the coalition takes on might change, but the message on this yard sign stays the same, and that's your home. This home supports housing for all. Those are also available at the front with stickers that you can put on your computer and water bottles. Third, if you're not already a member of the coalition, it's absolutely free. So take this fight, keep it local from the bottom up. Go to DallasHousingCoalition.com. There aren't any other commitments to joining, and you'll be invited to our future meetings as a coalition. And then fourth and finally, we spent 2 hours here. Thank you again to Waxbase and Grant for hosting us. We would love to continue the conversation straight down this walkway. If you want to join us at Oak Cliff Brewing, we're going to hang out there for about another 30 minutes to an hour. You can ask Chuck any questions you didn't get to answer or ask him tonight. And look forward to seeing you all next time. So thanks again for coming out. Have a great rest of your day.